Imagine a scenario where we can map vast landscapes with pinpoint accuracy, all from the sky. Welcome to the future of vegetation mapping, where artificial intelligence meets aerial imagery to revolutionize how we understand and manage our natural lands. While this vision is promising, we still need to see how it performs in practical, real-world conditions. Hello everyone, I'm Sally McClure, the Nature Conservancy Science Coordinator for the Illinois River Program. This presentation focuses on using artificial intelligence, or AI, to automate aerial imagery analysis for mapping vegetation and cover. We will explore the challenges faced with current methods and the potential benefits of AI-based mapping. I'd like to delve into the importance of vegetation maps. To do this, it's essential to highlight why vegetation itself is crucial and the reasons behind the necessity of mapping. Diverse and abundant native wetland plant communities on the floodplain were at the base of food chains, converting sunlight energy to biomass, primary production. These plants were eaten by critters, secondary production, contributing to complex food webs on the floodplain and in the river. Plant communities also provide habitat for wetland species, helping to ensure biodiversity and ecological balance. According to a report by Chris Hine and others, more than half of the natural wetlands have been lost in the Illinois River Valley through the conversion of floodplain wetlands and lakes to drainage and levee districts, primarily for agriculture, and associated natural plant communities were replaced by corn and soy. Vegetation communities on the remaining non-leveed floodplain were severely degraded or even eliminated by altered hydrology, water pollution, including chemicals and sediment, and invasive species, severely reducing primary production and habitat system-wide. Today, restoration and long-term maintenance of native plant communities on the floodplain are essential for restoring these ecological functions and conserving the river ecosystem. Mapping vegetation allows us to document and better understand these important communities and their effects, and also their fluctuations over time due to ever-changing environmental conditions, for example, due to climate change, as well as to variations resulting from management actions. On the right, you can see what one of these maps look like. This 2023 vegetation map of the Conservancy's Emiquon Preserved Wetland was created by our partners at the Illinois Natural History Survey's Forbes Biological Station. This map shows several vegetation communities, including in dark blue with green stippling aquatic bed, which consists of plants like coontail and elodea or elodea, depending on which camp you're in. Floating leaved, shown as the bright green dots, which in the case of Emiquon is primarily American lotus. We've got hemimarsh, which is the alternating horizontal green and blue bars, and it represents one of the more complicated communities, as it often contains aquatic bed and floating leaved, open water in light blue, and alternating vertical brown and green bars representing persistent and emergent, which consists of plants like cattails. Then there's the darker solid brown scrub shrub, which at Emiquon is primarily willows. Again, such vegetation maps not only help us understand what the vegetation communities look like for that year, but we have them for every year since we started restoration in 2007, so we can see changes over time. Here is our water elevation hydrograph from 2007 when we started restoration to current. Time is on the x-axis and the water surface elevation in feet above mean sea level is on the y-axis. So the line shows the surface water elevation of the Emiquon Preserved Wetland over time. Green is where we were not managing hydrology. Yellow is when we were pumping from Emiquon to the Illinois River. Purple is when we were gravity draining water out of Emiquon and into the river. And the red is when we gravity flowed water into Emiquon from the river. Now, here are some of these annual cover maps produced by the scientists at Forbes Biological Station. And we don't have a lot of time to get into the details of specifically how the vegetation communities changed with fluctuations in hydrology, but at a glance, you can see that they do change. And these maps can help us identify and understand some of the cause-effect relationships between hydrology and plant communities to facilitate science-based management decisions. How we might manage hydrology to affect those robust and diverse native plant communities that are so important to the floodplain wetlands and the river ecosystem. The maps can also help us identify areas that need stewardship interventions, like treating invasive plant species with fire or herbicides. So, how do we get these maps? While the methods used to produce these maps have evolved over time, I'm going to share a quick overview of the general methods currently used and then talk a little more in depth about this project that develop and evaluate the use of artificial intelligence to produce these maps. So how do we get these informative vegetation maps? As I indicated earlier, our vegetation maps have been produced annually since 2007 from staff at the Illinois Natural History Survey's Forbes Biological Station. To develop the maps, they collect field data on plant community composition and locations during peak biomass periods in late August and September. This timing is crucial for documenting vegetation at its peak abundance. They invest a lot of time in the field. About this same time, other contractors collect high-resolution aerial imagery of the wetland. Unfortunately, processing the aerial imagery often takes several months, so it usually isn't available to the researchers until January. Then, Forbes staff use their data and field notes to manually draw polygons that represent the different identified vegetation community types on the aerial imagery using GIS software, which is a powerful desktop geographic information system used for creating, analyzing, and sharing spatial data. This is another labor-intensive, time-consuming process. To get to the incredible detail on these maps, I've zoomed in on the image of the swiveling black rectangle here. These maps are highly informative, and they include tables documenting the actual species encountered. I have a snippet of the table here. They're highly informative, and they help us understand the composition of the vegetation community. While we receive good, usable products, there are some challenges in the traditional mapping method. One of the primary ones being the amount of time it requires. Field work takes a couple weeks. It may take 6 months to get the processed imagery back, and then identifying and delineating the polygons for the different vegetation communities on the imagery takes another roughly 6 weeks. This process of identifying and creating the polygons is not only time-consuming, but it is also inherently subjective in nature. While the traditional maps have always been of high quality and have more than met our expectations, the subjective nature of the tasks means that the decisions must be made regarding the delineation of the vegetation communities. So what the vegetation type is and the exact locations of the boundaries between the communities. Therefore, the maps can turn out different depending on who makes them, and even then, that could likely vary from day to day. I'll talk more about this later. Furthermore, this time-consuming process in obtaining the mapping results can affect our ability to make timely decisions, and this can hinder us in implementing the most desirable management actions, particularly as it relates to hydrology and stewardship. I started thinking about how I could increase the turnaround time for these maps, as well as reduce bias and increase consistency of our maps, and free up time for our research partners, so they can spend less time making these maps and more time on answering some of our other important research questions. As an ArcPro user, I couldn't help but think that there was a way that we could use AI to detect and delineate vegetation communities, and that was the spark for this new trial project. I learned about Pictera, a Swedish web-based software developed in 2016. It uses cloud-native machine learning and artificial intelligence to perform geospatial analysis. We are evaluating using AI algorithms to automate vegetation mapping. The image we see here is a clip from a part of my AI model. I'm currently creating and testing a model that significantly reduces ambiguity and subjectivity, taking a more objective approach. By integrating AI, we aim to minimize human subjectivity in mapping, resulting in more consistent outcomes. This model will analyze imagery and training shapes. Not to worry, I'll elaborate more on that shortly. This AI-driven approach could streamline the overall mapping process by significantly reducing the time and effort required for manual mapping. The automation will allow for faster data processing and more timely updates, enabling quicker decision-making and more efficient resource allocation. Ultimately, this should lead to more effective and responsive management strategies. As I mentioned before, for this model, I'm using Pictera as the AI platform. As shown in the table, we have imagery dating back to 2007. It was collected using various modes. We've got imagery collected by fixed-wing aircraft, drones, and satellites. Some of the imagery is the typical red, green, blue, and some is color infrared. And for some years, we have both. The imagery also comes in different resolutions to help increase comparability. In an attempt to compare apples to apples, all imagery is converted to the same format. We chose red, green, blue imagery over color infrared because most of the imagery available comes in that spectrum. Now, multiple models will be created and tested to understand the effects of the different resolutions on the results. We are looking at a visual run-through of our Emiquon imagery. My point in showing this is to emphasize that there are significant differences in the plant community signatures, both among years, as can be seen as the signatures change from year to year, and there are differences within years. For example, this vegetation looks different from this vegetation and also different from this vegetation. In explaining how I'm using AI to map the vegetation communities, I'm going to grossly oversimplify. So I have the computer identify groups of similar pixels based on color histograms. I'll get into it here. We can see the red, green, blue aerial imagery collected in 2017. I'm going to zoom in on this small, roughly 2.5 acre area that I know includes a bed of American lotus. Trust me, this is lotus. Actually, trust the folks from Forbes Biological Station because they drew this polygon and classified it as lotus. Now we'll zoom in even further, and I suggest that the boundary between the lotus and the adjacent submerged vegetation bed is somewhat arbitrary. If I were to draw this line in, it would likely be a little different, and if I did it a second time, it would likely be different again. So for the new and hopefully improved method, I tell the computer areas in here are lotus, and I tell the computer that areas out here are submerged aquatic bed. Then I have the computer assign each pixel to the proper group, and it looks like this, with lotus being represented by green and submerged aquatic vegetation purple. It would be impractical to have someone try to create polygons for each of these small areas, maybe as small as a few square feet. But the computer can be trained to do it consistently, and do it quickly. One thing we cannot get with the AI-based vegetation modeling is that same granularity of species that we get with the traditional method of having scientists on the ground identifying individual species. With AI, the ability to glean out the individual species is much more limited, with the possible exception of monotypic stands like the American lotus bed. In wrapping up, I'd like to review how these two methods of mapping vegetation stack up. I've already went over the details of the traditional method, so let's look specifically at those details in the artificial intelligence method. Time input. With AI, there is an initial upfront investment in time to create the model. However, in the long run, it should be a much quicker process, allowing us and our partners to focus on other critical research and monitoring activities. Product delivery. One of the key benefits of using AI is the ability to generate vegetation maps in weeks rather than months. Objectivity. AI mapping reduces inconsistencies and variabilities often present in traditional mapping methods. The results should provide more objective evaluations, improving decision-making processes. Shape precision. The AI model will be more precise in identifying vegetation community types and delineating boundaries between communities. However, model errors can occur when encountering unfamiliar images. Given the complexity and variability of vegetation communities, this can be challenging. Since it's impossible to train the model on every vegetative scenario, results may not always represent reality, or the model may even be unable to classify some areas. We are yet to see how this plays out. Species specificity. The model usually can't differentiate individual species as the traditional method does, so we currently cannot obtain a complete plant-specific vegetation profile. Overall, with AI's quick turnaround time and precise delineation, and the traditional method's ability to document species-specific information moving forward, I think a hybrid approach to mapping with some field data collection to document species and verify the outputs from the AI model may be the best approach.